Why do some crimes echo through decades until a single date on the calendar promises final reckoning? Tonight, we trace 6 condemned paths from broken childhoods to the last walk down a fluorescent corridor, searching for answers buried beneath grief and rage. Their stories will grip you, disturb you, and challenge everything you believe about justice. Subscribe now and join the investigation as we step into the shadowed silence of America's next executions. Anthony Floyd Waywright, scheduled for execution June 10, 2025, Florida. Anthony Wainwright's childhood unfolded along the Blue Ridge foothills of western North Carolina, the middle boy in a family that fell apart when his father walked out and his mother juggled 3 jobs to keep the lights on. Teachers recall a restless 11-year-old who scrawled muscle car sketches instead of long division, a teenager who began skipping class to sneak beer behind the football bleachers, and a 16-year-old already bragging that jail bars didn't scare him. By his early 20s, he had piled up burglaries and auto thefts, landing in a North Carolina minimum security unit where he met an older inmate, Richard Hamilton, who talked about big scores waiting on the other side of the fence. On April 13, 1994, the pair sliced through a dorm window screen, sprinted for the tree line, and vanished into the Smokies with a stolen pickup. 3 weeks later, after a 2-state spree of burglaries, they drifted south to Lake City, Florida. There, on the warm spring night of April 27, 1994, 23-year-old nursing student and single mother Carmen Gayhart stepped out of a grocery store and never made it to her car. Wainwright jammed a pistol into her ribs while Hamilton grabbed her keys. They forced her into her own Ford Bronco, drove to a lumber mill to ditch their pickup, and then rumbled north on a dark stretch of State Road 6. Along the way, Wainwright stopped at a truck stop, marched their terrified hostage down a sand road behind the fuel depot, raped her, then strangled and finally shot her, twice to be certain, before leaving her beneath slash pine needles. Hamilton later said Wainwright fired the gun. Wainwright told detectives Hamilton pulled the trigger, but investigators found Wainwright's palm print on the rifle. A frantic manhunt began at dawn when a school custodian discovered Gayhart's body. Surveillance cameras traced the stolen Bronco to Mississippi, where a state trooper traded gunfire with the fugitives during a traffic stop, wounding Wainwright in the leg and ending the chase. In court, the horrific details: a young mother's pleas, bruises matching a rifle barrel, a bullet that exploded a locket holding her children's photos, unleashed public fury. Prosecutors tried the men together, but with 2 separate juries to avoid mutual finger-pointing mistrials. Both panels returned death recommendations. Judge Vernon Douglas called the murder pitiless, evil, and vile, and imposed electrocution sentences plus 3 life terms for kidnapping, rape, and robbery. For 3 decades, Wainwright's lawyers filed a thicket of appeals alleging biased jurors, insufficient mental health evaluations, and improper instructions. Federal courts rejected each claim. Hamilton died of natural causes on death row in 2023, but Wainwright pressed on alone until April of 2025, when Florida's governor signed the death warrant. Unless last-minute motions succeed, the now 54-year-old will receive a lethal injection cocktail at the state prison in Starkey on June 10th, exactly 31 years and 6 weeks after Carmen Gayhart's final night shift. Her 2 children, now adults, have said they plan to witness the execution to close a circle of grief that never really closes. Gregory Wayne Hunt, scheduled for execution, June 10, 2025, Alabama. Greg Hunt grew up amid the red clay hills of Walker County, Alabama, the grandson of coal miners who believed hard work and Pentecostal hymns could tame any demon. Yet the quiet boy who fished Blackwater Creek with a bamboo pole began unraveling after high school. Odd jobs never lasted, whiskey became breakfast, and relationships dissolved under the weight of jealousy. In the summer of 1988, he courted 27-year-old Karen Lane, a nursing aide saving for night classes. Friends remembered Karen's warm laugh and her patience with Hunt's brooding moods until the humid night of August 1st, when an argument in her apartment escalated into horror. Prosecutors later reconstructed the scene from blood spatter patterns and Hunt's own crude confession letter. He pistol-whipped Karen to the floor, tied her wrists, jammed a broom handle down her throat, and beat her head against the linoleum in a frenzy that fractured her skull. He rifled her purse for cash, wiped fingerprints with a dish towel, and walked into the dark carrying her car keys. When Karen's roommate returned at dawn, she found a room that looked like a hurricane had passed and a body the coroner would call an atlas of blunt force injuries. Within hours, deputies traced Hunt to a cousin's farmhouse. They found him scrubbing clothes in a metal wash tub, scratches across his knuckles. DNA tests, then newly admissible, matched semen in Karen's mouth. In 1990, a Walker County jury convicted him of capital murder in just 2 hours and recommended death by an 11-1 vote. Hunt offered minimal defense beyond saying the sexual assault never happened, but the medical examiner's photos swayed even reluctant jurors. The judge set an electrocution date, later converted to lethal injection when Alabama changed its protocols. For 35 years, Hunt has fought the verdict, arguing ineffective counsel, prosecutorial misconduct, and most recently, that he did not sexually assault Karen, which would reduce the crime from capital to simple murder. Appeals courts consistently ruled the evidence: semen swabs, a broomstick splinter lodged in the victim's throat, Hunt's handwritten apology to a jail chaplain, overwhelming. In 2023, Alabama authorized nitrogen hypoxia as an alternative execution method, and Hunt, ever defiant, selected it, saying he would breathe the same air God gave Adam. On May 8, 2025, Governor Kay Ivey signed his death warrant for June 10th, the state's 5th planned nitrogen execution. Hunt fired his attorneys and announced he would argue pro se that new Supreme Court precedent should spare him, but the Alabama Supreme Court dismissed the claim. Victim impact statements filed by Karen Lane's siblings describe birthdays spent at a graveside and the ache of explaining to their children why Aunt Karen lives in heaven and can't come to Christmas. If no federal stay intervenes, prison staff at Holman Correctional Facility will fit Hunt with a mask carrying pure nitrogen. Within minutes, doctors say, the brain slips into hypoxia, the heart beats wild, and the body goes still. Reverend Jeff Hood, who ministers to death row prisoners, plans to hold Hunt's hand through the glass and says the condemned man has made peace with meeting whatever justice waits on the other side. John Fitzgerald Hansen. Execution set for June 12, 2025, Oklahoma. John Fitzgerald Hansen was born George John Hansen on a windy April morning in 1964. The last of 5 brothers stacked like cordwood in a sagging clapboard house just north of Tulsa's rail yards. His mother balanced diner shifts and night cleaning, while his father shuffled between welding jobs and the bottle. By 14, Hansen was skipping classes to boost lawnmower engines for pocket change. By 18, he was stealing whole cars, racing their engines up Route 66 before torching them in the blackjack scrub. A brief stint with the Army ended in a bad conduct discharge after he traded base rifles for meth. Local police called him the kid who never sticks around, a drifter whose rap sheet, burglary, armed robbery, assault, lengthened like the oil field shadows beneath Oklahoma's summer sun. On August 31, 1999, Hansen and prison acquaintance Victor Cornell Miller prowled the parking lot of Tulsa's Promenade Mall, hunting an easy getaway vehicle. they fixed on 77-year-old Mary Agnes Bowles, a retired banker whose only misfortune that day was choosing a quiet corner near the loading dock. Miller jammed a pistol against the windshield. Hansen slid into the back seat beside Bowles, and the gold Cadillac slid into traffic before witnesses grasped what they were seeing. 40 minutes later, the car rolled into a gravel pit outside the town of Owasso. Bowles begged for her life. Hansen pressed the muzzle of a revolver to her temple and fired, then ordered Miller to bury the body beneath powdery red dirt. Fate intervened in the form of Gerald Max Thurman, a 44-year-old trucking company owner making a late delivery. Thurman saw the Cadillac's headlights sweep across the pit and walked closer to investigate. Miller shot him 4 times, tossed his phone into the weeds, and left him to bleed beside his flatbed trailer. Thurman survived long enough to describe the shooters to his nephew over a frantic call, then slipped into a coma that would claim him 2 weeks later. The killers fled across state lines in Bowles' stolen car, robbing 2 liquor stores and a credit union during a wild 8-day spree. A silent alarm tripped at the credit union led police to a battered silver Taurus on Highway 169. Inside, officers found Miller behind the wheel and Hansen in the passenger seat counting stained cash. Ballistic tests matched their weapons to both murders. The Bowles family filled 3 rows at Hansen's first trial in May 2001, listening as prosecutors painted the crime. A grandmother herded like livestock, a witness silenced, 2 lives erased for a night of gasoline and beer. The jury deliberated 5 hours before recommending death for Bowles' murder and life without parole for Thurman's. Hansen smirked as the sentence was read, whispering to his attorney that he would never see that needle. He almost proved himself right. Federal prosecutors soon claimed Hansen for a string of armed bank robberies, transferring him to USP Pollock in Louisiana on a life without parole federal term that took precedence over Oklahoma's death warrant. For years, the Bowles and Thurman families watched execution dates set and canceled, while appeals ricocheted through courts. Hansen argued that childhood trauma, fetal alcohol syndrome, ineffective counsel, and flawed jury instructions tainted the verdict. Each motion dissolved under the weight of evidence. Fingerprints on the revolver, Thurman's dying declaration phone call, Bowles' DNA on Hansen's shirt. A political shift in 2025 changed everything. Oklahoma's Attorney General petitioned the new federal administration to send Hansen back for execution, and the U.S. Department of Justice agreed. 2 deputies escorted him in shackles from Pollock to McAllister's death row in March. On April 1st, the Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals set June 12th as the date Hansen would breathe his last. He is 61 now, hair gone to iron gray, hands trembling from early-onset Parkinson's. Yet the Bowles family insists time has not dulled their pain. They keep Mary's church gloves in a shadow box and say they will sit front row as the lethal injection drips, waiting for the flatline that finally ends a 26-year echo of gunshots in a gravel pit at dusk. Stephen Christopher Stanko, execution set for June 13, 2025, South Carolina. Stephen Stanko entered the world on January 13, 1968, at Guantanamo Bay Naval Base, while his Marine father pulled guard duty along the razor wire fence. Discipline wrapped his childhood like boot camp fog. Yes, sir, morning inspections, lights out at 2100, punishment laps for every misstep. Yet, beneath the pressed uniforms and honor rolls, simmered a fascination with control. At 15, Stanko was caught binding smaller boys during a sleepover game. By 20, he was serving 8 years for kidnapping and assault after he hogtied a college girlfriend during a fight and held her at knife point in his dorm room. Parole boards flagged him as manipulative, charismatic, dangerous, and released him in 2004 after psychiatric reports claimed he had aged out of violent impulses. Freedom lasted 18 months. In April 2005, Stano befriended 74-year-old Henry D. Turner, a former produce market owner living alone in Conway, South Carolina. Stano spun a story about needing a place to stay after his father died. Turner, a soft-hearted widower, offered his spare bedroom. On April 12th, neighbors heard two muffled pops just before dawn. Police found Turner face down on a bedroom rug. Two .38 caliber rounds through a pillow into his skull. The killer had washed the dishes, bagged the brass casings, and stolen Turner's Buick LeSabre. 30 miles south in Murrells Inlet, librarian Laura Ling opened her home to Stano later that evening, unaware of the murder up Highway 17. Ling prized her books and her teenage daughter's ballet trophies. Stano coveted the unlocked back door and the sense of power coursing through him. Hours after moving in, he shot Ling twice, slit her throat, raped her 15-year-old daughter, and left mother and daughter bleeding on opposite sides of the living room sofa. The girl survived by pretending to be dead until sirens neared. With blood still drying on his sneakers, Stano fled west, refilling Turner's Buick at lonely gas stations and telling cashiers he was late for a funeral. The manhunt flashed across every South Carolina broadcast. Charismatic ex-con with salt and pepper hair, traveling armed and desperate. An Augusta, Georgia, trooper spotted the Buick 2 days later outside a Barnes & Noble. Stano surrendered without a fight, handing over a stolen pistol as calmly as if returning a library book. Interrogators described him as coldly polite, the sort of man who might critique your grammar while planning your murder. Inside the trunk, authorities found Ling's jewelry, Turner's checkbook, a blood-spattered copy of Truman Capote's In Cold Blood, and a handwritten plan titled A New Life Out West. Trials unfolded like dueling tragedies. Horry County prosecutors tried the Turner case first in 2006, parading crime scene photos of pillows feather burst by bullets and a Bible on the nightstand open to psalms about mercy. The jury took 90 minutes to find Stano guilty and recommend death. 5 months later, Georgetown County tried him for Ling's murder and the rape of her daughter. Another death sentence plus 2 life terms. Appeals metastasized through state and federal courts. Challenges to forensic evidence, claims that juror voir dire was rushed, accusations that lethal injection violates evolving standards of decency. Each failed. Psychiatrists hired by the defense labeled Stano a studied sociopath, fully aware, fully responsible. South Carolina paused executions for nearly 12 years amid drug shortage litigation, but in 2023, lawmakers approved firing squads and refurbished the electric chair. On May 16, 2025, the state Supreme Court signed Stano's death warrant for June 13th. Giving him until May 30th to choose method. His attorneys demanded more information after April's firing squad execution of Mikhail Mahdi allegedly lasted longer than protocol allows. The High Court denied the request. Stano, now 57, has spoken publicly only once from death row, telling a reporter that he regrets wasting intelligence on selfish appetites. Ling's surviving daughter, now a trauma counselor, scoffed, saying, "He regrets being caught, not the terror he breathed into me." Shortly after 6 p.m. on June 13th, the doors of the redesigned death chamber in Columbia will slide open. If Stano selects the firing squad, he will be strapped to a chair marked with a black target over his heart, 5 volunteer shooters hidden behind a brick wall 8 yards away. If he chooses the electric chair, a copper cap smeared with saline will crown his head and 2,000 volts will hurl his body against the restraints. Either way, prosecutors promise the state will finally answer the question that has haunted 2 counties for 2 decades. Does justice ever feel like enough when the echo of gunshots still rattles inside a survivor's memory every time she closes her eyes? Thomas Lee Gudinas, execution set for June 24, 2025, Florida. Thomas Lee Gudinas entered the world on a sweltering June afternoon in 1969, tagging along at the end of a 6-child brood stacked inside a cinder-block duplex near Orlando's Colonial Drive. His mother waitressed at a truck stop, pouring coffee for drifters whose stories fascinated the boy. His father drank paychecks behind the same diner, bellowing threats that made young Tom shuffle sideways like a ghost in his own house. Teachers remember a polite second grader who drew dragons on math sheets, a sullen middle schooler who hid bruises under a hoodie, and a runaway 16-year-old smoking meth behind a bowling alley because the neon buzz drowned the shouting at home. After an unremarkable Navy hitch that ended in a bad conduct discharge, Gudinas drifted through strip mall jobs and slept on couches, telling girlfriends he was just between dreams. Nights found him prowling Orlando's glitter-slick nightclub district, nursing $2 drafts and slinging pickup lines polished by beer and bitterness. Late on April 20, 1995, Michelle McGrath, 27, an aspiring Disney costumer who stitched Cinderella gowns by day and attended nursing classes by night, left Rosie O'Grady's pub after a belated birthday toast. Security footage shows her balancing a takeout soda, laughing as she fished keys from her purse. Gudinas lurked half a block away, pacing near her white Pontiac. Prosecutors later argued he had stalked her since inside the bar, drawn by her easy smile, and the way strangers leaned in to hear her voice. As McGrath unlocked the driver's door, Gudinas slid up, flashed what looked like a badge, and whispered that he was plainclothes security investigating break-ins. He climbed into the passenger seat, resting a revolver on his thigh. The Pontiac rolled toward St. James Cathedral's darkened parking lot, headlights slicing palm frond silhouettes across stone columns. There, Gudinas ordered McGrath out, forced her between 2 dumpsters and raped her on the damp asphalt. A single shot rang out, startling an insomniac priest strumming a hymn on the rectory piano. McGrath's body, dress torn, rosary tangled around her wrist, was found at dawn by altar boys setting up for Mass. Detectives traced a partial license tag impression in sand to a brown Buick registered to Gudinas' roommate, Carrie Ledford. The 2 men had shared drugs and women for months, and that morning, Ledford noticed scratches on Gudinas' hands and a Sarasota Sharks t-shirt spattered with dark flecks. A silent alarm tripped at a pawn shop when Gudinas tried selling McGrath's locket. Officers arrived to find him bargaining over $40. Blood under his fingernails matched McGrath. The 1996 trial riveted Central Florida. Prosecutors displayed the locket, still streaked with fingerprint dust, and played a jailhouse call in which Gudinas bragged, "One less princess in the Magic Kingdom." The jury gasped when the medical examiner explained that McGrath's heart had continued beating for nearly a minute after the fatal shot, pumping blood in widening circles beneath her body. After 4 hours of deliberation, the panel recommended death. Judge Dorothy Russell agreed, pronouncing Gudinas a predator who turned Orlando's fairy tale nightlife into a horror scene. Gudinas' appeals spanned 3 decades. Claims of intellectual disability, an IQ test put him at 83, juror misconduct, a foreman had discussed the case at a barber shop, and withheld evidence. Defense lawyers argued that Ledford was the shooter. Each plea crumbled. In 2010, the 11th Circuit found overwhelming forensic proof of Gudinas' guilt. In 2017, the U.S. Supreme Court declined review. Florida paused executions in 2019 amid lethal injection drug litigation. But in April 2025, Governor Ron DeSantis signed a warrant fixing June 24th as Gudinas' last sunset. Now 56, Gudinas spends nights writing letters to true crime bloggers, insisting he found religion. Michelle McGrath's parents, both in their 80s, say they will attend the execution wearing pins shaped like tiny sewing needles. Reminders of the costumes their daughter once designed for children who believed in happily ever after. At precisely 6 p.m., the curtain will rise in the Stark death chamber. A gurney under fluorescent glare, a syringe whispering through plastic tubing, and the final scene of a story that began with a fake badge and ended with a bullet echoing against cathedral walls. Richard Gerald Jordan. Execution set for June 25, 2025, Mississippi. Richard Gerald Jordan's biography reads like the prologue to a Southern Gothic. Red dirt, restless ambition, and a fatal belief that money can tidy any mess. Born in 1946 in Starkville, Mississippi, Jordan excelled at debate, quoting Byron to impress cheerleaders and arguing theology with Baptist elders. Yet beneath the charm writhed a gnawing dread of mediocrity. After a short stint in the Air Force, he married young, sired 2 sons, and opened a lawn equipment shop that hemorrhaged cash. By 1976, divorce loomed. Lawyers demanded retainers, and Jordan's bank account flattened into overdraft fees. He confessed to a drinking buddy, "I'd kill for 40 grand right now." On January 12, 1976, Edwina Martyr answered her doorbell in the quiet Biloxi suburb of Sunkist Manor. She was a mother of 3, home alone while her husband worked at Ingalls Shipbuilding. Jordan, feigning delivery of a dozen roses, coaxed his way inside, pulled a .38, and forced Martyr into her Buick. Driving to a secluded hog farm, he fired 1 shot behind her left ear, rolled the body into swamp reeds, and dialed Martyr's husband from a payphone, demanding $25,000, blissfully unaware that Edwina lay beyond ransom or rescue. When Martyr failed to pick up her children from school, police launched a dragnet. A sharp-eyed clerk recalled a nervous man buying flowers hours earlier. The receipt described Jordan's turquoise Dodge van. Within 2 days, detectives traced the license plate to Starkville, where Jordan's ex-wife admitted he'd borrowed her van for an out-of-town job. Phone records matched the ransom call. Cornered outside a Shoney's restaurant, Jordan confessed in a trembling voice, "I never meant to shoot her. Things went wrong." Jordan pled guilty in exchange for a life sentence, but in 1977, Mississippi's Supreme Court vacated the plea, ruling the judge failed to advise him properly. In the retrial, prosecutors sought death, painting Jordan as a schemer who rehearsed the ransom call on cassette. A Harrison County jury obliged, sentencing him to die in the gas chamber. Thus began the longest capital saga in state history. 7 resentencing hearings, 3 death sentences vacated for constitutional errors, and endless wrangling over whether Jordan's prior vacated plea barred another death verdict. Each new trial dragged Martyr's children back into court, forcing them to relive the phone call in which their father heard a stranger demand money for a wife already cold. Jordan's appeals became law school case studies. In 1991, the Fifth Circuit vacated his death sentence because prosecutors improperly mentioned Martyr's family suffering during penalty phase. In 2002, a federal judge removed Jordan from death row, citing ineffective counsel, only for the state to secure a 3rd death sentence in 2015. Defense attorneys argued chronic heart disease and strokes left Jordan too frail to execute. Prosecutors countered that age does not erase guilt. Meanwhile, the prisoner penned letters of apology to Martyr's 3 grown children, who returned them unopened, Mississippi adopted a single-drug pentobarbital protocol in 2023, easing a decade-long execution hiatus. On April 30, 2025, Governor Tate Reeves signed Jordan's death warrant, declaring, "Justice delayed must not become justice denied." Now 79, stooped behind bifocals, Jordan shuffles with a walker to the visitation cage, his voice rasping from COPD. He tells clergy that he dreams of coastal sunsets and the whistle of Biloxi shrimp boats. Sounds Edwina Martyr never heard again after stepping onto her porch with a polite smile for the man with roses. On the evening of June 25th, the lethal injection chamber at Mississippi State Penitentiary in Parchman will glow under surgical lamps. Witnesses will file in, Martyr's children in the front row, each clutching a white rose. Jordan will lie strapped on the gurney, tubes taped to parchment-thin skin. When the warden nods, a syringe of pentobarbital will seep into his vein, and 69 seconds later, if protocol holds, his heartbeat will flatten into a clean digital silence. Outside those concrete walls, Gulf Coast waves will hiss against the sand, carrying away the echo of a ransom call answered almost half a century ago. 6 dates now etched in ink remind us that justice walks a razor hedge between closure and vengeance. As the chemicals settle and hearts beat their last, the ripples reach every family, every faith. Remember their stories, reflect on the cost, and share this to keep the conversation alive today.